Hello, everybody. Welcome to the English Lit session today. We are really excited that y'all are with us on this Friday as we are going to dive into some more literature and think about how we can unpack it a little. I'm Susan Barber from Atlanta, Georgia. Here's my co teacher, Bear Barber, once again, sleeping through class. Let's do a little grammar lesson before we start. There is a place. There shows possessions, and there is a contraction. Like there, the class of 2020 is going to ace the AP Lit exam this year. So I'm Susan from Atlanta, Georgia, Grady High School. Again, we are just so thrilled to see people from all over the world joining us. Shout out to Miss Griggs' class from Choctaw High School in Fort Walton Beach. That's where I go for vacation. Love that area. To Perry High School in Chandler, Arizona. Know they're watching. Mr. Jean's class from Lincoln County High School in Fayetteville, Tennessee. Got a really nice letter. Your students love you. And to Miss Logsden's class in Noblesville High School, Noblesville, Indiana. Love all of these classes that are tuning in. And to all of the rest of you, welcome. We're excited that you're here on this Friday afternoon. Mr. Escobar, how are you today?
I am doing great. How is everyone out there? I'm Carlos Escobar from Miami, Florida, from Felix Varela Senior High School. And normally we don't work on Good Friday, but this is indeed a Good Friday to be with you, and it doesn't feel like work. It feels like we're talking with friends and family, and that's how we're going to approach each of these sessions. I received an interesting email from Caroline from Poway High School, and she asked a good question. And tune in and listen up, everyone, because I think this is an important one for each of us to discuss and consider. Caroline asked me, what if on the AP exam this year, and we know it's going to be prose, what if the excerpt, if it's an excerpt, what if the excerpt comes from a novel I've already read? How much outside information can I bring in? There's a fine balance, Caroline, and everyone else listening. First of all, the odds are that you will not recognize the passage, right? There's just so much literature out there to
It's
extrapolate these.
probably not going to be The Great Gatsby or even The Kite Runner.
Yeah,
It's
probably not. But let's say that you have read, you know, Bleak House or Middlemarch or something more uncommon, and you recognize the passage. I would actually warn you at that point. A lot of times we get so excited at that moment that we sort of want to show off what we know and bring in all this outside information. At all times, remember that there's a very specific narrow prompt in front of you, and that is the task. The task is not to write an essay on the text. The task is to write a response to that prompt using that specific excerpt. So my another way of addressing the question is this: use what you know to help build your interpretation of that section of the text. In yesterday's video, Ms. Barber spoke to you about focusing on the beginning and the end of the passage. That's really important. That's a very interesting notion to consider. When they're developing these exams, they select where to begin the passage and they select where to end the passage. And perhaps there is a purpose for that, right? Or I'll say there is a purpose for that. So instead of trying to extend it and expand it beyond the confines of um, that excerpt, try to live within those confines, because truthfully, if it was selected, there is plenty there to explore and to delve into. By all means, use your outside information, but as filters to interpret what you see there, but stick to that evidence and stick to those characters and the events that are in front of you. I also want to give a shout out to Miss Zamora Wiley's class in Mercedes, Texas. She tells me that she can see Mexico from her house and from her school, and that is exciting because we're certainly getting these emails from all over the place. So I'm assuming maybe number 50 over here might be uh, her school. She's right by the Brownsville Matamoros crossing border there. And this is what we've received so far from the United States, all this correspondence, and it's truthfully so touching. And we have Canada in this picture as well. And we've received some very kind emails from our friends up north. But the world has really been connecting with us, and we've been connecting with you guys, and it's really incredible that we are disconnected. And even though I'm in Miami, Miss Barber's in Atlanta, we're facing the same things. We're facing an exam. We're facing a pandemic. We're facing seniors who are very, very saddened by what's going on. Um, and it is a comfort to know that we're not alone, and we all have this common need to connect and common need to discuss literature. So let's do just that. So hello to all of our friends around the world. Um, Today we're going to begin as we normally do with the homework assignment, right, Ms. Barber?
That's correct. So last night you looked at Under the Feet of Jesus. We read that at the end of the lesson. I love this passage so much. And you were, let's see, populating. We were talking about point of view. Yes, point of view. So, what is the point of view of this passage? And I will tell you, Mr. Escobar went back and forth on this. Is this third person omniscient? Is it third person limited? We did determine that we think it is third person limited, because in the whole first section you can see like we have this insight into Australia and how what she is thinking and what she is feeling. She did not imagine this in line 32. Um, and she would ask over and over. It tells what she was thinking. And so we see this whole left hand column really is giving us insight to how she is feeling and what she's thinking about the events happening around her. So that was
Just to
the, go
share
ahead.
with this is the book. This is Vida Montes's book, and she kindly signed it for me. She dedicated it to my son. But since then, now I have a daughter, so I need to meet her again so she can sign a book for my daughter. But this is it. A lot of people spoke to me last night about how moved they were by the language, and that's definitely what you're going to get. And it's not the longest of novels, so it's certainly one that we can read and we can pick up during this time if you're interested in this one. And I highly recommend it. And you were talking, yeah, about going back and forth between limited and not limited. It becomes clear once you read the whole novel. But when you just have an excerpt, identifying it, right? Coming up with a label might be tricky, but that's less important than what you do with that information, right, Ms. Barber?
That is correct. So if you put third, if you identified it as third person omniscient, do not sweat over that. We still know we have this third person narrative here, and it becomes more important with why. We keep going back to this, what is the function of that? And why is that important? And so we just went through some evidence. Why is that important, though? I wonder, why would we have third person as opposed to having first person here, or even limited versus omniscient? Well, like I said, when we looked at this whole left hand column, we are really um, able to crawl around in Australia's Estrella's character, her heart and her mind. We know what she's thinking. We have empathy for her. We identify with how she is feeling. Is there a disadvantage of this, or what might we possibly miss from this point of view? We don't really see what Perfecto is thinking. But honestly, I think this is what helps us get into the function of this and why this point of view might be chosen. I think it's because it allows Perfecto to have this more mysterious quality about him, as opposed to us knowing everything about Australia, how what she's thinking, what she's feeling. Now we have this mysterious Perfecto, and that really sets up this nice contrast between the characters. And contrast is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. But I think
And maybe we already know everything about Perfecto with his name, right? Maybe.
well, it is, I mean, yeah, that tells us a lot. And tip, don't just read over a character's name. You have to consider names. So perfecto, I mean, right. What does that tell us about him?
And if we're doing that, then we got to talk about Estrella too, right? With being a star. So you have this star and this perfect character. I mean, this is so interesting. And you have to make something of these names, right? Again, we don't discuss any of these things in isolation. We're talking about point of view right now, and here we are getting excited about the names of the characters. Well, that's because it all adds up to the same thing, right? It all adds up to how we interpret the text, and that is the key here.
And I really, I mean, I love taking these individual elements out and looking at them on their own, but I'm really excited about next week and the couple of weeks after that when we're talking about writing and how all of these fit together and blend together, because that's really where we make meaning of all of these. So I'm excited about that. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, we thought it was important for them to go back to the prompt here, and maybe that'll give them some insight into why the point of view was important. So if I can go back just 1 second, and we could look at this prompt, carefully read the following excerpt from the novel Under the Feet of Jesus by Elena Maria Viramontes, then write a well-organized essay in which you analyze the development of Estrella's character. Right, it's Estrella's character that we're supposed to focus on, and she's the one then who is our I'm gonna pardon the metaphor here, but she's our shepherd here, right? She's the one who's going to lead us to whatever Viramontes's purpose is here. So the fact that we're not getting this omniscient narrator who's getting into the heart and mind of Perfecto is very clear to me. He's not the one we're supposed to be focusing on. We're supposed to be, like you said, crawling into her character, crawling into her skin, wearing her shoes, however, whatever mixed metaphor we want to use here. She's the focal point, and the prompt told us that. And I think that's a way of understanding why the point of view is what it is. We're supposed to focus on her. She's going to lead us to whatever answers, if you will, quote unquote, we're supposed to arrive at.
So let's transition into today's lesson and see what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be talking about the function of contrast within a text. And contrasts are so important because once we have contrasting ideas, contrasting elements, contrasting views, contrasting characters, all kind of contrast, that helps us really dig into the complexity. Again, none of these texts are simple. If they were simple, we would not be looking at them. We are trying to like grapple with things that have lots of layers and lots of dimensions to them. So, contrast is a perfect way to show the complexity in a text. Contrast can be introduced through tone, character perspective, dramatic situations, setting, imagery, even way more things than this. But again, it's not that just can we identify them, but what do we learn from them? And so the contrasts lead us to showing conflicting values, in characters or speakers, different perspectives on ideas, and even just complex interpretations and controlling ideas over the course of a text. So we're going to jump into that today. Think about why the author would set up contrasting elements, and then what we can learn from that, how we can use that to dive deeper into a text.
And well, I got ahead of myself. I want us to look at this because we are wired to identify contrast, right? And maybe we go back to kindergarten and we talk about opposites or antonyms and things like that. And we see a series of pictures here, right? And let's talk about the faces first of all, right? So what words can we come up with these? How are they contrast? Well, you have happy and you have sad, right? I think that we can agree with those. We have that one image with the two fists, and then we don't get to read all of it, but I think we can determine that it says love and hate. So we see within one, and I thought it was interesting that within one body, within these two hands, you have these contrasts, because you might have that ambiguity in a character, Jekyll and Hyde maybe, right?
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and the center picture in the bottom right, you have the moon and you have the sun. Those are clearly contrasting images. And then in the top left, you have the desert. So what would we expect? Well, the the water, right? A beach scene. And our minds, I think, automatically recognize these contrasts, right? And we're constantly um, trying to create these categories for ourselves, good versus evil, light and dark, big and small. We recognize these quite readily. But in literature, they're not always that obvious. And here are a few words that are jumbled up. And if you're watching this after the fact, I would like for you to actually pause right now and try to figure this out. How can you pair these? It requires a little bit of background knowledge and literary knowledge, but I think I'm only using, or we're only using text that we've already discussed here. But for those of you who are watching live, or if you've already unpaused it, let's talk about this. We have Grand Isle in the top right. And what would be the opposite of Grand Isle? What would be contrasted? And it doesn't have to be direct opposite, but juxtaposed to Grand Isle. If you think of The Awakening, we open in Grand Isle, which is vacation, leisure, but then I believe it's after chapter 16, we return to normalcy. We return to propriety. We return to as um, the world as it should be when you're no longer on vacation. And the opposite of Grand Isle in that novel is New Orleans. We have Linden Hills, and the opposite of that would be Brewster Place. Brewster Place is uh, a housing development, a housing community, and people at Brewster Place are really struggling to make ends meet. And the opposite of that is Linden Hills, which is this like ultra high end housing community where everyone is quite wealthy. We have Claudius and Hamlet. That's one that I'm sure a lot of you recognize quite quickly. And we have Mama and Carl Lindner. For those of you who read A Raisin in the Sun, and just an hour ago, I was watching a documentary on Lorraine Hansberry. Um, if you remember, Mama wants to use the money to buy a house, and Mr. Lindner is part of the welcoming committee. And that's all I'm going to say about Mr. Lindner. But for those of you who have read that play or watched it, you know what I mean by the welcoming committee. But then we have the Montagues, and there's no pairing for that. And if you have Montagues, what would be the contrast for that? Of course, we need the Capulets, and we have Romeo and Juliet represented there. But this isn't something that you could just look at and identify, right? You have to read and you have to think about these places to be able to recognize them as contrast. And look at the top of the PowerPoint, it says identifying, right? The next part, if we were in class right now and if I'm reviewing for the AP exam, I might tell my students, okay, Grand Isle and New Orleans, what is the function of that contrast? Why does Kate Chopin create those two settings? And how is the novella enhanced by the juxtaposition of these two places? And whether it's a presentation or an essay or a class discussion, the more we delve into that, then the richer understanding of that text becomes. We have our famous charts now, right? And this one supposes that there are only A and B, right? But of course, you might have three or four things that are being contrasted here. But notice how we have a column for character and setting and perspective and imagery, and I left the other one blank. Ms. Barber told you when she presented this, that that first bubble, that first gray text box is only listing some of the things that can be contrasted in a text. There's no way that we can list them all. The task at hand really is for us as readers to open our eyes to those things that are being juxtaposed or contrasted. And as soon as we identify them, then we think about the function that they might serve in the text. So that's why that last column looks like that. It's for you to insert whatever else that you might see. It might be tone, for instance. Um, it might be perhaps another set of characters that are being contrasted. The possibilities are truly endless. Because you're already familiar with Under the Feet of Jesus, why don't we look at this and try to identify some of the contrasts that perhaps you saw last night or that you might be able to spot right now. And let's do it like this. We begin with Estrella. Who do you think might function as a contrast, as a foil, as a character who stands in opposition to her or who is very unlike her? You might disagree. I mean, our interpretation might be slightly different, but I'm going to say perhaps it's Mrs. Horn. I think that Estrella feels that she is different from Mrs. Horn. She is not made to feel like they are on the same page or on the same level. We also have the alphabet. We have the script A, the letter V, and all these things are being compared to all the way on the right. If you look around line 63, the tools, there's a contrast, and it's not a contrast because these things are opposite. It's a contrast because these things are sort of uh, placed side by side for comparison. How is the alphabet like or unlike the tools that she encounters? And it's interesting also to consider what is the development of that juxtaposition as the passage continues. Um, and perhaps you've already thought about that, but that's definitely something to explore. We have Mrs. Horn again, and what character other than Estrella could be contrasted to Mrs. Horn? And I think it's Perfecto. I think if we look at the way that Perfecto treats Estrella with patience, with respect, with care, he's teaching her, right? And we look at Mrs. Horn's treatment of Estrella, where she's not focused on the teaching, she's focused on other things. Their behavior is definitely being contrasted here. And finally, look at the way that, and it's related to the contrasting characters, but look at the way that Mrs. Horn speaks to Estrella, right? She asked her how come her mama never gave her a bath. Whereas look at the way that Perfecto treats Estrella. Aquí, pegarle aquí, to take the hinges out of the, he's very um, uh, caring, he's patient, he's not condescending, and he's not offensive, truthfully, to this character. So we go back to our chart and we populate it, right? So we have two characters that are being contrasted, Estrella and the teacher, but then we have another set of characters between Perfecto and Mrs. Horn. Then we have the letters of the alphabet and the tools being contrasted. And we have speech patterns or dialogue, even if it's not in quotes for that first one, but Perfecto's interactions with Estrella compared to Mrs. Horn's interactions with Estrella. But this isn't the end all, right? This is just the first step where we're identifying the contrast. And if we were in class, or perhaps if your teachers are going to use this with you, or if you want to extend it yourself, now you're going to speak about the function. Why are these characters being contrasted? Why are the alphabet and tools being contrasted? And why is it that these two people speak differently to the same character? When you get to the heart of those contrasts, we're going to get into the value systems. We're going to get into Viramontes's purpose, perhaps Viramontes's claims or observations about the world, and that's where you're going to start earning those points, particularly in that middle row. Actually, it's going to make your thesis so much more sophisticated that your middle row will then become much richer, and we're going to be pushing towards the the 3 and the 4 as opposed to the 1 and the 2 along that rubric row. Miss Barber, should we read this together?
Let's do it. So we're going to look at an example from the Kite Runner today and think about contrast there. I became what I am today at the age of 12 on a frigid, overcast day in the winter of 1975. I remember the precise moment, crouching behind a crumbling mud wall, peeking into the alley near the frozen creek. That was a long time ago, but it's wrong what they say about the past. I've learned about how you can bury it. Because the past claws its way out. Looking back, I realize I've been peeking into that deserted alley for the last 26 years.
One day last summer, my friend Rahim Khan called from Pakistan. He asked me to come see him. Standing in the kitchen with the receiver to my ear, I knew it wasn't just Rahim Khan on the line. It was my past of unatoned sins. After I hung up, I went for a walk along Spreckles Lake on the northern edge of Golden Gate Park. The early afternoon sun sparkled on the water where dozens of miniature boats sailed, propelled by a crisp breeze. For those of you who have read The Kite Runner, and here's my copy of The Kite Runner, and it's all torn up, not because I hate it, but because I love it and I've read it so many times. Those of you who have read it, you recognize this is the very beginning of the novel, and it presents so many contrasts. It presents so much information that truthfully we don't even understand at this point. I always tell my students, as soon as you finish reading a book, go back and reread the first chapter, and it's as if you were reading it for the first time because of all that was presented to you that you missed the first time. But I want, again, if you're watching live, I want to give you a second to try to identify some of the contrast. And then if you're watching this after the fact, go ahead and pause. Um, and I challenge you to find contrasting images, contrasting settings, contrasting perhaps characters or descriptions. Let's see what you come up with. And I'm going to click now. So if you're still working and you don't want to see the answers, don't look right now. But these are some of the ones that we came up with ourselves. We have the overcast day contrasted to the early afternoon sun. We have the frozen creek contrasted to the flowing water. We have winter and summer. We have these 3 locations. We have an alley, we have Pakistan, and we have Golden Gate Park. And perhaps at the beginning of the novel, we don't know enough about these places to understand the significance. But those of you who have read it, you know that there are definitely major contrasts between these key settings. And this blue one is I think more difficult to understand because it's not as simple as winter and summer. It's not just 2 words that are being contrasted to each other. And this is perhaps the richest one because it's about a contrast of ideas or notions. That was a long time ago. But it's wrong what they say about the past. I've learned about how you can bury it because the past claws its way out. So the contrasting ideas here is people's perception of the past. Is the past something that you can bury? Or is the past something that will always, always be there and it can claw its way out whenever it has a chance to do so? So that's probably my favorite just because of the depth, the fodder for analysis there. So as usual, we organize, right, Miss Barber?
That's correct. And can I say one thing if you go back for a
Yeah.
second? I think it's important, like what we don't want you to look at this and feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't see all of this. That is completely fine. Like we're all going to notice different things when we're looking at a text and we're going to gravitate towards different things. We're just trying to give several things, but you're probably not going to notice all of the different things that we're saying. But what we would like to encourage you to do is the contrast that you do notice, lean in to them. So this is not saying, I don't want you to look at this and feel like, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't see that. We're just trying to give several different examples. So whatever you do notice, whatever you do recognize as a contrast, lean into that and go with that.
Yeah, and it's definitely a skill you can practice, right?
Yep.
Open a PDF of a novel, go to your bookshelf and pick up a book, open to any page and challenge yourself. Can I find contrast here? Even if it's a book you haven't read, it's not about what you know about what came before or after. We're just looking at the words. So it's certainly something that I think you can develop, and I think it's incredibly kind and correct for Ms. Barber to tell you you cannot feel, I think, overwhelmed
Or
or
discouraged.
discouraged. Absolutely not. I mean, what we're trying to do is give you the spectrum of possibilities, and you guys out there are probably finding 10 things we didn't pick up
Right.
on, and I'm sure
Right.
we'll get those emails as well, right?
Right.
And yeah, we're not prophets, we're not sages, we don't have all the answers. We're playing along with you, right? We're trying to explore and interpret literature and get excited about it. But yeah, there's and if we had Husseini here, he might say, oh, I didn't
Right.
even recognize I had all those contrasts in my novel. Or maybe, the book belongs to you once you're the one reading it. And with practice, you'll find a lot more of these, and then that just means that you're going to be able to address the function with a lot more examples and build the richness of your interpretation.
So let's think about what we've talked about today. We've talked about not only identifying contrasts, but more importantly, what purpose do these contrasts serve within a text? So we do want to first be able to find them. What are the contrasts? How do I see shifts, juxtapositions? But then I want to take that next step. What do these contrasts emphasize? What values do they highlight? What ideas do they bring emphasis to? And how does that contribute to our interpretation of a text, or maybe a central or controlling idea in a text? Identification and function. What is it? Why is it important? We're the broken record. We're saying this every day, no matter what we talk about, right?
Absolutely, but I mean, that is at the heart of it. And like I mentioned, I think in one of the other lessons that you and I have both read. So this comes from a lot of experience, not only in the classroom but also at the AP reading when we're scoring these things. How many essays simply state an observation but don't delve into the the function, the commentary, the analysis, the the real
Mhm.
legwork is done in that realm and not just in the picking the right quote, right? But saying something smart about the quote and tying it back to your thesis and tying it back to the prompt at all times.
So today we're going to look at a prompt, and ironically, this is one that I read for. I read about 1,600 essays on Peregrine Pickle. This was such a fun prompt to read essays on, and we're going to let you have a chance to work with it. We've done a lot of modern prompts, but this is an older prompt, so I think that's good to have that contrast. We're going to look at something older.
And
Um,
even though we're not having them write the essay,
It's
it would
the weekend. No, we're not gonna have y'all write an essay this weekend.
absolutely, but we're still giving you the prompt because the prompt gives you a lot of context, which is going to be necessary, I think, for
Yeah, do you
understanding.
want to read the prompt? Then I can jump in with paragraph one.
Sure.
We'll read it for you, then jump on out to let them get on their weekend.
So again, we're looking for contrasts, right? We got to remember that. But let's start with the prompt. In the passage below, from The Adventures of Peregrine Pickle by Tobias Smollett, Mr. Pickle encounters Godfrey Gauntlet, the brother of his beloved Emilia. Consider how the two men confront their own uncontrolled emotions, and yet attempt to abide by their social norms. In a well-developed essay, analyze how the author explores the complex interplay between emotions and social propriety in the passage. You may wish to consider such literary techniques as dialogue, narrative pace, and tone.
Wow, there's a lot there. And we're
There
gonna
is a
spend a
lot.
whole lesson deconstructing prompts and
Mhm.
talking about that. But let's jump into this passage. In this first paragraph, I'm not going to lie, this can be a little confusing. It'll help to have it read aloud. Mr. Pickle, you have carried on a correspondence with my sister for some time, and I should be glad to know the nature of it. To this question, our lover replied, Sir, I would be glad to know what title you have to demand that satisfaction. Sir, answered the other, I demand it in the capacity of a brother jealous of his own honor as well as of his sister's reputation. And if your intentions are honorable, you will not refuse it. Sir, said Peregrine, I'm not at all present disposed to appeal to your opinion for the rectitude of my intentions, and I think you assume a little too much importance in pretending to judge my conduct. Sir, replied the soldier, I pretend to judge the conduct of every man who interferes with my concerns, and even to chastise him if I think he acts amiss. Chastise, cried the youth with indignation in his looks. Sure, you dare not apply that term to me. You are mistaken, said Godfrey. I dare do anything that becomes the character of a gentleman. Gentleman? God, what? Replied the other, looking contemptuously at its equipage, which was none of the most superb. A very pretty gentleman, truly.
Yeah, there is a lot there, isn't there? Let me just say that the numbers there, 10 and 15, that's because we get these from the actual AP exam and the lines are numbered and we just forgot to take out those lines. So line numbers. So I apologize for that. Um, Before we read the second paragraph, can we just elucidate this just a little bit, just in terms of plot? Let's not give away any analysis, right? There's there are two gentlemen and they like to say sir a lot. Um, so maybe they're very proper, right? But what's going on here? Well, we have a brother and we have a man who is in love with the other man's sister, and they're wondering whether it's a good match. They're wondering whether the intentions are good, right? Is that as far as we want to take it there, Ms.
Yeah,
Barbara?
that's good. There's a lot of questioning about assumptions at this point.
Yeah. The soldier's wrath was inflamed by this ironical repetition, the contempt of which his conscious poverty made him feel, and he called his antagonist presumptuous boy, insolent upstart, and with other epithets which Perry retorted with great bitterness. A formal challenge having passed between them, they alighted at the first inn and walked into the next field in order to decide their quarrel by the sword. It's a lot of violence here. Having pitched upon the spot, helped to pull each other's boots. Oh, that is bizarre. And laid aside their coats and waistcoats, Mr. Gauntlet told his opponent that he himself was looked upon in the army as an expert swordsman, and that if Mr. Pickle had not made that science his particular study, they should be upon a more equal footing in using pistols. Peregrine was too much incensed to thank him for his plain dealing, and too confident of his own skill to relish the other's proposal, which he accordingly rejected. Then, drawing his sword, he observed that were he to treat Mr. Gauntlet according to his deserts, he would order his man to punish his audacity with a horsewhip. Exasperated at this expression, which he considered an indelible affront, he made no reply, but attacked his adversary with equal ferocity and address. The youth parried his first and second thrust, but received the third in the outside of his sword arm. Though the wound was superficial, he was transported with rage at the sight of his own blood, and returned the assault with such fury and precipitation that Gauntlet, loath to take advantage of his unguarded heat, stood upon the defensive. In the second lunge, Peregrine's weapon entered a kind of network and shell of Godfrey's sword. The blade snapped in two and left him at the mercy of the soldier, who, far from making an insolent use of the victory he had gained, put up his Toledo with great deliberation, like a man who had been used to that kind of encounters, and observed that such a blade as Peregrine's was not to be trusted with a man's life. Then, advising the owner to treat a gentleman in distress with more respect for future, he slipped on his boots and, with sullen dignity of demeanor, stalked back to the inn.
There is a lot there. There are a lot of contrasts there. And just let me build your confidence a little. You work with a passage like this, you're ready for whatever, you know? So I think this will be a good confidence booster for you. So we're just asking you tonight to look for contrast. What are some contrasting elements that you see in here? And then what is the purpose of those? What function do they serve in this passage as a whole?
Yeah, we've looked at different contrasts, right? We looked at tone, we looked at character, imagery, speech patterns, and all those are at the students' disposals for tonight. I want to thank you guys for being with us this week. This is, I think, the conclusion of the second full week, and we have 3 weeks left of these lessons. I know that times are difficult out there, but it is certainly the highlight of my day to connect with each of you every single day. So goodbye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Same class of 2020. Love you. Have a great weekend.